Yeah, the very first Braunstein?
Braunstein, yeah, Braunstein game.
Was,
Braunstein.
The common myth about role-playing games is that one has to play a single person in these games. For this reason, the term skirmish game has come to be associated with the origin of role-playing. A skirmish game is still a war game. The only difference is that one figure represents one man, instead of each figure being used to represent 20 or 50 men. This doesn't explain that the Minnesota gamers have already devised a wargame RPG within their battles, as well as games where they play the rulers and generals of nations.
I mean, before Braunstein, there was this medieval game where there were 3 sides. So people were suddenly trying to make deals and play off against one another. And they had differing objectives, and it was non-zero sum.
It's Christmas of 1968. Wesley is back home from college. The word goes out that Wesley is going to referee a war game.
They arrived to see a table laid out with no troops on it, but lots of troops over on the side tables where we were getting them from. And there's a model of a town with a river running across the board, and on the other side of the river there's an old castle, which I tell them is Brownstein University. And I gave them a little backstory about this was famous because it fought off the imperial armies in the 30 Years' War 150 years ago, yada, yada, yada. And this is set in 1797, and the French Revolution is threatening to spill over into Germany, and this is one of the enclaves of the Kingdom of Prussia, which is located near the French border. And you know, everybody's worried that the French army will be showing up soon. Okay, you got your general scenario.
Wesley's new game changes the scope and type of role-playing. It has few rules. In fact, the game is primarily designed for social interaction and bargaining.
It's like stepping stones going up. What he did with Braunstein is not like anything I'm familiar with, you know, but it's hard to separate, you know. This thing about you have strokes of genius, I mean, that's kind of a myth. You know, even something like Edison. Edison bought the patent for light bulbs. He didn't invent light bulbs, but he's the one who figured them out and perfected them. And it's a lot like this with these games. Braunstein, it would be awful hard to say, oh, well, this is the genesis of it, but it was there, you know? Because Braunstein was different from what came before. He took it the extra step.
Dave Arneson, when I asked how he had gotten these ideas, credited Dave Wesley with the creation of role-playing gaming.
Wesley's new idea is a watershed moment. Regardless of how historians categorize this game, up to this point, no other game reaches the same level of role-playing as this initial game.
And then I grab one of the guys and I tell him he's the commander of the local militia in the town. And he's fine with him, sounds good. And I give him like 8 figures. He was close to what he would have been in a Napoleonic game. He's in charge of a battalion of militia. So he has some little lead figures that are going to sit in a certain place on the table, and he can imagine that he will wind up shooting at people.
Braunstein is often compared to another game from that period known as Corns. It too is a type of role-playing game, yet the scope is limited to World War II combat. There's nothing within the rules for Corns that evokes the same kind of individual play that Wesley's players describe.
When you're playing Corns, of course, you don't want to tell anybody anything that would let them figure out where you were so they would shoot you. So we didn't have much interaction in a Corns game.
You have something like Corns, you're not really a character, you're inventing your own. You're not given a character like he did in this game.
These were all roles. They were, you know, the one guy was the town mayor, one guy was the baron, another was a bookseller and a spy, and you know, they had all different roles and everything. And once they got them started as to who they were, well, they didn't have to worry about somebody shooting them.
Another thing that happened was that 22 people showed up and I'd planned on about 8. So as additional people show up, I'm just inventing new characters for them to play and winging up a quick verbal description of what they're doing, what their objectives are.
The whole point of the Braunstein game is to interact as individuals and to advance one's personal objectives. Wesley has moved away from wargaming completely.
So this is kind of out on the fringes of what we'd have had in a Napoleonic game. We would have had people who got these strange starting position things. You're escorting a column of wounded back from the battle with your cavalry or something.
Wesley is playing a trick on his players. They think that all this prologue will end with a battle. What they don't know is that this pre-battle intelligence gathering exercise is the game.
It was set in Napoleonics because that's what they were playing all the time. And they were the villagers, the townsfolk that you would run into when you had a city or a town in the middle of a battle.
I grab another player and they tell him, okay, well, we'll get to the battle later, but before we start, you're going to have to make some decisions for the mayor of Braunstein. And this is this town, and there was a riot last night, and your local Landwehr commander put it down, and he's arrested a bunch of students. But the Chancellor's University is probably pretty upset about his students getting beat up, and he wants to see you this morning, and you want to talk to the Landwehr commander, find out what exactly happened. Okay, and so you're going to start out in your office, and you get to talk to these other players who'll be showing up and settle some questions.
Wesley has created a true innovation in role-playing. Even the sources he is drawing from are not what you would expect in a wargame design.
I had read 3 books that made me think outside the standard wargaming box. One of them was Complete Strategist, which describes games theory as a mathematical exercise.
The book also briefly describes new ideas for how one can apply the theories to multiplayer game design.
In a zero-sum game, you win or you lose. A non-zero-sum game, more than one person can win. Maybe all of you can win if the objectives are different enough. That was kind of a radical idea at the time.
I read another book called Conflict and Defense, which I got because it sounded like it'd be about wargaming, which turned out to be negotiating contracts and stuff between disputes between labor and management. And the author's emphasis is on peaceful resolution of conflicts, which sure doesn't sound like a wargamer would want to read. But he registered on me the fact that in most conflicts, it isn't just that you have one objective and I have the opposite objective, and if I win, you lose. In many cases in the real world, you have multiple sides competing on something, and you can not only have to worry about whether what you do will be a disadvantage to you in negotiating with the union, you have to worry about whether what you decide to do would also be a disadvantage in how the IRS would treat you.
His third source, once again, is Strategos, from which Wesley draws the crucial concepts of the referee and player agency. Wesley is combining 3 distinct disciplines in order to create a game with simple rules and limitless variability. Additionally, the game is non-zero-sum, where a player's chances of winning are not dependent on someone else losing. In Brownstein, no one truly knows what anyone else is up to. By a certain point, Wesley no longer knows what the players are up to either. He has made a mistake and has ended up blinding himself to everything that is going on in his game.
I'm in a little room off to one side with the charts and the maps, right? And the other guys are out in the main room, and they're supposed to come in and see me one at a time, and I will move whatever they say to move on the board and tell them what they find out and send them back out.
So when they went out after their move of telling the referee, who's got the map, and putting everybody down on the map, they would go in the other room and they'd find out, well, you're the Baron? Well, I need to talk to you. And they just started to interact.
The players are pulling a little trick on Wesley by continuing to play in the other room without his knowledge. What they don't know is that Wesley has some more tricks of his own for them to deal with.
Jim Clark was a partner with Greg Scott in GHQ. Jim Clark was one of the older guys that Greg felt he really wanted to keep at his house, right? So there was a lot of hostility between Arneson and Jim Clark. Now, Arneson was student A, the loyal Prussian student who wants to defeat the revolution. Jim Clark was cast as the Prussian Jaeger colonel who comes into town with a battalion of Jaegers. A and B should really be getting together on stamping out the revolution, but I picked people who don't work well in harness at all. I wanted to destabilize the situation, not make it an instant formation of natural alliances, or rather an instant formation of alliances between people who like each other when their characters don't.
Wesley's Braunstein games, they're all set up in certain different ways with all kinds of stuff, a lot of different things could happen. Well, then you put people in place. And so it was a very social game. Everybody having a good time and nobody getting too bent out of shape.
With so much possibility built right into Braunstein, the players are now free to create their own little trick for Wesley. It ends up being one of the greatest stories of game history.
That was that crazy incident because Arneson played a student and Jim Clark played the colonel of the country, and he came down. He was going to make sure everybody was in line. Well, this student started to tell him, well, you got to do it this way and so on. And he says, I am the colonel in this area. You do not question what we are doing. He says, yes, but you're insulting my,
Arneson and Jim Clark, who are, supposedly should be allies, come walking into me and they say, we're going to fight a duel. How do we do it? I had no plans of people fighting duels. And I said, but how can you fight a duel? I mean, your figure is here and yours is here. He said, no, he came down from the college and crossed the river to talk to me, so we're at the mayor's office. They hadn't cleared that with me, and it's not what I planned to have happen.
And well, the last time the referee had them, they were on opposite sides of the town, so they shouldn't have been able to talk.
And I said, well, okay then, so what you're gonna do is, and I won't take you through the incident, but I just quickly formulated something in my mind about how many dice he's trying to get to roll, right? And the consequences of it are that Jim Clark ran his sword right through Anderson's heart and killed him dead or in a doornail.
So, Dave Arneson, kind of the father of fantasy role-playing games, dies in the very first role-playing.
And he dies fairly early on and ignominiously in the first role-playing game, and I had no idea of how I was going to deal with that, so that he was basically it for the rest of the evening. He's just floating around. He's a ghost. He's not in the game. Isn't that intriguing, right?
Did he hang out with you while you were reffing?
No, he hung out with the other people out in the other room while he got over the fact that I just killed him, I think. But it was a bit of a blow to Arneson to suddenly be trashed, right?
I got a couple of moves beyond that, but then basically Wesley says, it's not working. So he called everybody in and gave them the story, what was going on and who did what and so on. And he thought it was a failure, and we just thought, hey, this is a lot of fun.
I was feeling really dejected because I had no idea of half the stuff that's going on, and I figured out that the game had just gotten totally out of control and they'd run amok out there in the other room, wheeling and dealing and setting things up with each other that I wasn't a part of.
What was your investment before this night? I mean, how much were you using with this game, for you personally?
Well, I'd put in a bunch of time planning this thing at odd moments when I should have been studying high energy physics, but I actually probably should have been studying quantum mechanics, but that's a fine point, we don't care. In any case, but as it was, I conjectured it would just be an experiment, see if a thing like that could work. And I came away and I said, okay, well, that was a dud. It's impossible to run it, you can't control it, and so that's that.
I would say that Dave Wesley does probably not get enough credit because while he was not the creator of the particular Dungeons and Dragons rules or scenarios, without the concept of the referee as he introduced it, none of any of that would have worked or would have been possible or would have been any different than any board game where you roll the dice. So